And I agree with you that people can learn it through time, but I also think it's so important for first-time buyers, particularly who are, not everyone is going to be as obsessed with, with getting to the bottom of it and not spending money on the lawyer as you.
What are you saying, Craig? It's my Scottish heritage. Hi and welcome to The Lowdown. This is Wellington's #1 real estate podcast. I'm Adam Coburn from Low & Co, and I'm here, of course, with Craig Lowe. And what are we talking about today, Craig?
Buying your first house.
Buying your first house. And we were just talking before the mics were on, about our unusual experiences buying our first houses. So tell us a bit about your first home that you bought.
So, it's a great question. I got interested in real estate investment early in my life, and I started selling real estate when I was 20. And I started selling real estate partly because I wanted to learn about the market, because I thought, real estate might be an interesting place to invest in over time. And I got excited about it. I started selling real estate to try and learn about the market as an investor, with little money, and I slowly built up a deposit at the time, and actually ended up buying my first property as an investment property, which was a boarding house on the terrace. 260 the terrace, and had 13 rooms, and we later on added an additional room to that as well, so ended up being 14-room boarding house.
So your first home, well, actually it wasn't your first home, property.
First property.
But I didn't know that. So did you just say you became a real estate agent so you could understand the market?
Well, I became a real estate agent firstly because I found out it was a $300 course in 3 weeks to get into it.
Right.
And I thought all my Christmases had come at once. With my attention span, I might be able to get through a course.
It was the lowest bar.
It was the lowest bar I could find to get it to do something. But I was also, starting to get, in my 20s, I started to get interested in just, building a future, and because I had not been doing that for the 5 years prior to that.
Yes. Yep.
And so real estate was my world for a while, and I thought, what a wonderful place to learn to how real estate works, and with the view to investing in something. And I wasn't focused on a home at all. I had no desire to buy something to live in at all.
Yeah.
But I was only in my 20s, not in my 30s with a family or
So you could hardly say that is the typical path to your first property purchase, right?
Yeah.
And again, I don't know, unusually, my first property purchase also was an investment property, 3 flats in Ara Valley. I can't even remember the number now, but it was in Adams Terrace, which I thought was also had a nice ring to it. But what we're talking about today, or what we're sort of aiming to talk about today, is a different sort of scenario, right? So your typical first home buyer, right? So this is about how do you go about buying your first home? So let's just assume your typical first home buyer indeed is looking for a home to live in. They don't want to be a rent investor. They don't want to be an investor. They just want to buy a first home. It's a big process. It's a big journey. It's years. For the most part, it's got to be years of dedicated effort, right, to get to the point where you decide, look, I'm going to buy a first home now, right? And people think about this for a very long time, and they get ready for a very long time. I think there's some maths on.
I've read about that being about 10 years now.
Right, that wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah,
wouldn't surprise me at all. Right?
And that's with some discipline too, I'm sure.
So, but where do you start? Like, how do you determine I'm not talking about now in terms of the timing in the market cycle, because we both agree that timing the market cycle is just too hard, right? When is the right time for someone to buy a home? I mean, how does someone decide, okay, now's the right time to buy a home? I mean, is it all emotional, or is it all financial, or is it all a point in their life when they've got some stability and not moving around so much? Or?
It's clearly a combination of both, and I think people confuse this point. Actually, I think this is a really interesting topic for me, and that is that we've talked about this before, but emotion is not the antonym of rational. You can do something for your emotional self and it can be rational.
Yep.
You could spend overspend on a kitchen. You could spend $200,000 on a kitchen if you want, and that could be rational, as long as you're purposeful about the fact that you're doing it for your emotional self. That you're saying, "Hey, I want to enjoy this kitchen. It's going to be amazing, and I'm going to be able to cook these entertain and cook these fantastic meals." That's the right reason to overspend on a kitchen like that, right? It's not a financial decision.
For your own personal enjoyment of it.
And so there's a point about first-time buyers here that I'll get to, but I find a lot of people do the opposite. A lot of people are justifying these emotional decisions on a financial basis. So saying like we're going to spend $1 and get $1.20 or $1.50 back, and when they come to sell the house, they assume that they're just going to get a profit on the money they spent on it,
which is not necessarily the case.
Not necessarily the case. It doesn't work like that. So the key is being purposeful and saying, what am I doing this for? Am I doing it to make money, or am I doing it as a something to enjoy, and not confusing those two things?
But it is easy to get confused over those two things, and it's easy to persuade yourself it's one when it's the other.
Exactly, 100%. And I think the same applies to buying a house, in the sense that it's kind of what I was saying before, which is like, the house can't love you back, right? I mean, your partner can love you back, so it makes sense to fall in love with your partner. But your house, do we have to really feel like living in a beautiful home is so important and then fall in love with it? I mean, reality is that there are, of course, deeply human reasons why we do. I mean, it's family, food, fire, shelter. These are, ingrained in us, no doubt, over, millennia. But if you actually step back and be more objective about it, when you're young, it's important, I think, in our society and the way that society lives to build a future that is going to support your family and to mean you've got options and not to have too much risk. And I'm not talking about, you don't have to be the next mogul or anything, but just setting, making sure that you're setting things up so you're comfortable and you don't have the risk of bad things happening to you in life financially or otherwise. And so to do that, start compounding, as you'll be well aware. It means the more time you have, the more that compounding can do its work in a financial sense.
Perhaps you should say what you mean by compounding.
So what I mean is, if you start investing money early in life, you have a long runway with which every year, if you're making small returns, can amount to large gains over time.
Yep.
And through the power of compounding. And the human brain doesn't do it well.
The human brain does it very, very badly, in fact. And Albert Einstein said that compounding was the eighth wonder of the world.
Yes.
And was it also Albert Einstein who said, I think it was a corollary to that, compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. People who understand it receive it.
Yes.
People who don't understand it pay it.
Pay it, yeah. That's that's a great saying. It's a really good saying. And so my view is that, if young people should be rational and more rational and less emotional early.
Yes.
So that you can let compounding do its thing with a longer runway and allow them to have a better lifestyle, being more emotional. Like, they can make purposeful emotional decisions later. They can have the house that they want to spend them. And this is the problem with buying a first home is, of course, when you buy a first home, then all of a sudden you get more of those emotional pulls. Suddenly you've nesting, and you want to have the beautiful kitchen and the nice backyard and the border garden and all these things that cost money. You're constantly having to maintain it and seeing things that are wrong and keeping up with the Joneses and all these influences, which lead to bad financial outcomes, especially if at that time that you're at a stage in your life where you don't have a lot of surplus cash flow. So my view is people should think about this earlier. There should be better education on this stuff. Significantly better education from a much younger age, even starting, in primary school. And I'm sure there probably is much better things than when you and I were young already. But I think that is a really, really important area for social investment. And then I think, going back to the first time buyer, what I mean by that is, if people should not overstretch themselves in terms of how much money they're borrowing for a start, because that's going to be a real drag on compounding. Is if you're paying interest, then you are the opposite of what we were talking about before. You're the person who's letting compound interest work against them.
I mean, the counter to that, of course, is that when you're buying a house with someone else's money, then you are getting the full gain on value appreciation of not just the money you've put in, but all the money they've put in. So the more you borrow, the more potential there is for that leverage to work for you. But the counter is also true, isn't it? If prices soften for a bit, and we've just been through one of the most remarkable periods of price declines or value declines, certainly in modern history, the last 100 years that we've ever seen. But it can happen, right? And so the opposite is true. If you've got 10% equity in your home and prices fall by 20%, well, you're now negative 10% equity, right? So you've lost everything and then gone backwards by the same amount.
Exactly. Plus also I think there's another issue with it's a bit different buying an investment property from buying a home to live in, because if you overstretch yourself, like I was saying, you're just paying that interest to the bank, and the leverage sure is on the total value with capital gains, but you're not really talking about a cash flow producing asset at that point.
No.
And there is a difference in a cash flow producing asset and just a huge whopping great loan that all of your money is going to service, and you're relying on long-term capital gains for your compounding. I think that's quite a different.
So can I try and crystallise kind of the conclusions or the points that you're making here? You're suggesting don't buy something that's too expensive. Just buy something that's reasonable and is well within your means to reduce the risk. You're still getting a foothold in the market. It's more than likely that it won't be beautiful. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and not to get caught up in making it beautiful.
Don't spend all your capital making these improvements by putting in the granite bench and all that sort of thing. But what about things like repairs? Because so instead of taking $50,000, I think the point you're making is instead of taking $50,000 and putting it in that fancy kitchen, you just pay your mortgage down. Right,
yes.
So you're just building your cash, the surplus cash you've got available, because of course it's just human nature to spend every damn dime that we earn, isn't it?
Well,
people only really look at the repayments, and they think if I've got more money over the repayments, I can put that new kitchen in.
Yeah.
You're saying no, pay the debt down.
I would recommend a splitting between paying mortgage down and investing.
Right, yeah, buying some shares or something, or buying some investment property.
One good thing about paying your mortgage down is that you're instantly making a risk-free return at the rate of interest.
Yes.
But
net.
Yes, net. Exactly.
Like today, interest rates are about 6%, 6.5%, something like that. You pay $50,000 off your mortgage, you are getting a 6.5% return net.
Instantly.
By which we mean after tax.
With zero risk.
With no risk at all. Yeah. No effort, no thought, no selection, no finding stuff, just instant. So that's about a 10% pre-tax return.
In real estate terms, but yes. So
paying the debt off on your own home.
Yes, but there is a corollary to that as well, which is that you're carrying an opportunity cost, and so the reality is, and that's why I would recommend splitting out, paying mortgage down, as fast as you can. Again, all this depends on your earnings, and it's one of the reasons why it's so important not to overstretch, because you don't have these options.
You got capacity, you got wiggle room, you got a buffer to absorb knocks, because things will always happen that you don't expect.
But if you can split some of that into even index funds, which return on average, I think sort of 9 to 10% compounding over a lifetime, and then if interest rates average 6% or 7% in your lifetime, and you can beat that by
that's a 2 to 3% margin.
And as you know, compounding over the next 40 years until your retirement age or whatever, that is going to make such a huge difference to your future. Just that 3% difference, that delta between the paying off the mortgage and your investment.
So Craig, look, coming back, this is all makes total sense, right? If indeed you are thinking financially, right? There are a bunch of people out there who, great, but that doesn't light my fire, And what I want is the nicest, cutest, most attractive house I can buy today. Is that bad?
Well, I don't think it changes the advice, except for that they may not want to invest in other assets, right? So then maybe
they don't have the capacity. Yeah. They're pretty full up because they buy the nicest home they can possibly stretch to now.
And I think that's okay, but as long as people are purposeful about it and understand what their opportunity cost is. As long as you know what you're giving up and you understand the nature of compounding, and you say, I'm giving up, delayed gratification. So I'm giving up something in the future for more gratification today.
Yes.
And I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
No problem.
Because I sometimes say to people, well, get the best house you can comfortably afford, because selling your house and buying another house is very expensive. And if you have to do that twice as often, and it's profoundly disruptive and stressful, right? So the counter argument to what you were suggesting before, I think, is buy the best house you can possibly get your arms around that's still affordable, so you don't have to move as much. You can nest, you can settle. It's gonna meet your needs for longer.
The only issue I've got, and I think this is what we're kind of getting to here, is that this has been going on. It's been going on for too long that people have just been looking at their housing as their number one and only future asset.
True.
And so and this you pointed it out. We've just gone through 25%, 26% decline in values over the last 3 years. And that has, I mean, there are people, unfortunately, out there today, you know, we know this, that have bought properties in September 2021, who are now sitting on negative equity. And so the amount of time it's going to take for them to gain that back, after we know that it's on average now, I think about 10 years, where someone to build a deposit for a house right now, based on some maths I saw in the paper, you know, you think how devastating that is for those people. So it's not a one-way bet. You know, it's not a guarantee of success just to own one house and do that. And particularly over the next 20, 30 years, you know, we can't guarantee we're going to have the same returns that we did over the last 20, 30 years in real estate. So using that as your only retirement asset, I think, is a mistake.
So this is a balancing act. This is a tricky balancing act. I mean, if I listen to what you said in the last 1 minute, I could decide, oh well, I'm never going to buy a house. But you've got to weigh it up, don't you? You're not saying don't buy something in case the market falls. Well,
let me go to some of the advantages of home ownership that I think are rational but aren't to do with finance. Okay, so one thing is you can't change a rental property, for example, right? If you're renting something, you can't replace the kitchen, you can't, you know, and so you're beholden to someone else to look after it when things go wrong, and you can't make it how you want it to be. So you can't do something for your emotional self when you want to, apart from move to a different place.
You can't really nest.
You can't really nest, right? So the advantage of ownership is you get control of that. And then also the other thing is family security. So, you know, obviously when you own and live in a house, you don't have to move for any reason. You know, if the landlord sells the house from underneath you, you've got to move. If you've got children, even if you're happy with the way it is inside, you don't care about being able to renovate anything. You don't want to have to move because someone else has forced you to.
So you do get much greater security. Tenure.
So that is another reason why I think people should look at, I think it makes a lot of sense to think about this stuff really early. And do the investment stuff first, right? Like whether it's, you know, shares, or whether it's, you know, your own business, or whether it's, you know, index funds
or investment
property, right? Do that first while you're renting and get into it really early.
Taking all that you're saying, right? So you're not saying wait till the market drops. Don't go ahead. You're just saying be safe.
Yeah.
Right. Be safe. Be responsible. There is a risk of that, so don't go absolutely all in. You are saying, you know, make some investment before you get your deposit for a home. And there is indeed a very popular mechanism now here in New Zealand, of course, that everyone uses now for their, well, not everyone necessarily, but a lot of people use for their first home, saving the first home deposit, which of course is KiwiSaver.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
And that, of course, is essentially what you're saying, is they're making an investment to I mean, whether they pull the whole thing out to make their home deposit or not is another matter, but they're certainly investing before they buy their first home in order to save for their deposit, right? So that would be consistent with that.
Yeah, that's right. I only worry, that is my concern, is the way that it works with people then being allowed to take out a certain amount, you know, for at a certain time to buy it as a deposit for a home. That becomes the goal, and we're still in that zone.
Yes.
You know, and
it's all about the house.
There's a wider point here, a social point too, which we actually need more investment in productive assets, not just real estate. Right? You know, I mean, it would be nice to have deeper capital markets, better businesses, more, you know, more jobs, and you know, just a better thriving economy. And I think, you know, it's important for individuals to invest in housing, don't get me wrong, especially property investors. We're going to need them, because I think we've got a problem coming up because people are not buying them now, and that's going to cause rents to go up in the future. But ignoring that, you know, we also are so obsessed with owning a house as our future security, and so a lot of countries that haven't had as quite the runaway capital gain that we've had have a very different economy that doesn't have that issue. It's not as reliant on the housing market and the wealth effect of house prices going up to drive the economy. It's, you know, because people are investing in businesses, and then their capital markets are deeper, and they have a lot of success coming from that.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just come back to first home buyers then. So imagine that, you know, someone's decided, I want to buy my first home, I've got my KiwiSaver, I've built up a deposit, it's taken me my 10 years, whatever the case might be. How do they actually go about getting started and finding or choosing what is the right property for me? I mean, we've talked about the principles of don't push the barrow out too far, and, you know, be sensible about it. But, you know, going out into the marketplace, there's properties on the market, there are real estate agents. How do you get started? How do you choose how do you go and find the property that's right for you?
Probably the first port of call would be a mortgage broker. Would you agree with that? Just go, get your finance sorted, figure out exactly what you can borrow, and again, with that view of being purposeful about what your future is. In fact, I'd go back a step and just try and tie these two topics together. If someone's planning to buy a house, maybe the first step is actually to think about what is the 10 and 20 year plan here, I think that thinking of the end game in mind and working backwards from it. Are we looking at this house as our retirement option? Are we looking at it as the perfect home that we want to renovate? And are we nesting? What area of life are we in? And making those decisions if you're in a partnership with your.
So what goal is this house designed to fulfil?
Exactly, and that will help determine exactly how you want to approach it, and how much mortgage you want to take on, what kind of property you want to buy. Are you have you got surplus funds and surplus cash flow at the end of paying your mortgage to invest and think about retirement from a young age as well, or not, or is that not the goal?
So Craig, I just want to buy a house to live in.
Yeah.
So what do I do?
What do you do?
You said go to get a mortgage broker.
Yeah.
I agree. You first got to get your money. No point going shopping unless you know how much money you got in your wallet, right? So you go to the mortgage broker, you go through that whole process. They say you've got this much in savings or in KiwiSaver or whatever, you can access that much, and then you can borrow this much. So now you know how much you've got to spend to go shopping with. Okay, good. I've worked out my finance. I agree that's 100% required. Now what do? How do I find the right place?
Well, I think you this day and age you start online, don't you? And you can obviously talk to real estate agents for sure, but I think it's the first step is just to go out there and start looking.
That's the key, I reckon.
Just
obviously, you're looking online. The first part of the process of conducting your search is at your desk, right, or on your phone, whatever, looking at all these places. You build up your short list or whatever. But it's essential to go out and walk through the houses, right, the apartments, the townhouses, whatever. I find that people they come to me, they come to us, and they say, Adam, here is my list of requirements. You follow them up 6 months later, they've bought something entirely different. You almost take those requirements and disregard them because it's just so often the case that people buy something completely different. You don't actually know what you want until you've seen 100 houses. So you go out there and you see lots and lots of houses, physically walking through them, and then if you find something you like, now what do? And you think, gosh, I'd like to own that one.
Well, it depends how long you've been looking. I think, it takes, we would say it would be very rare, even if you're not a first-time buyer, to buy a house in the first couple of weeks of looking or to make an offer on one, right? Like
very rare.
I mean, how often do we hear that, if you ask a buyer how long you've been looking and they say a week, you know pretty quickly that, it'd be pretty rare for them to actually be serious about buying that house.
Yep.
So, and I think that's rational. You want to learn the market, you want to understand it, you've got to learn pricing, you want to figure out what you like. There might be a better one around the corner that you're just not aware of yet. So
you have to have seen enough properties to have to be, I don't know, I call it the buyer training program.
Yeah,
it's
great.
You've seen enough properties to be able to recognise A, what you like, B, what you can afford, and C, how much to pay.
So 3 months? You think there's about 3 months of looking minimum? I would, and that's solid looking. I'm talking about, because you know how there are active buyers and there are passive buyers, and passive buyers are, that takes a lot longer to get all
committed
that stuff.
Buyers versus not committed buyers. That's right. So if you're actively in the market 3 months, every Sunday you're looking at 5 houses.
Yeah,
right.
I think that's about
that
right.
sort of level of activity.
Yeah.
By that point, you're match fit.
Yeah, and you'll have a much better feeling of value or price than you actually probably even give yourself. We know how price sensitive the market is, right? You can drop the price on a house that's not selling by 20,000 or 25,000 and sometimes get a multi-bid situation quite quickly after just that small adjustment.
Yes.
So the market's very price sensitive, and partly it's because people are actually very in tune, with what they're prepared to pay based on all those experiences of looking through, through.
So you start the process with this kind of vision of what it is you like, right? And an understanding of how much money you've got. Pretty quickly, most of the time, people will realise I can't have everything that I want for my budget. And then there's quite a real kind of process of working out, well, of these things that I've thought I wanted, which ones am I willing to forego? And which ones are real essentials, the really important ones, the non-negotiables? It might be location, It might be the size of the house. It might be the yard or the outdoor living.
There's always a trade-off.
Yeah, there's always a trade-off.
It doesn't even matter how much money you've got. There's no such thing as perfect.
That's
house.
right. That's right. You're going out there with $2 million. You're still going to have to make sacrifices, right? So only by going and looking at these places will, for the most part, do people actually come to realise what they really want and what they're willing to give up.
And at some point, making offers. I mean, one thing I think is important is once people are, once they have got their finance and they've been through that process, they've seen enough houses to feel like they've got a reasonable handle on it and they're ready to make an offer. Once you see a house that's 85, 90%, maybe 95% what you want, or and within your budget, you got to make an offer on it because there's no such thing as 100%. And sometimes I've seen people make the mistake of just, looking for perfect for too long and missing out. Even if you found something that was 97% and you were so glad you didn't make an offer on the one that was 95, there's no guarantee you're going to get it.
No, that's right.
So
you've got to go for the ones that fulfill most of your requirements, or as many as you think are realistic. And the ones that are in front of you now.
It might take you three, 4 offers before one's accepted.
Completely.
And every time you make one, it's not a waste, is it? You learn way more. Once you get to that point, you're significantly more focused. You've done a lot of due diligence, which we can talk about. And so I think that's an important part of the process, is actually getting to the point of making offers, because you learn a lot and you work out what's important, what the risks and opportunities are, and how much money you're prepared to spend. And the next time you're more educated.
And sometimes, a lot of the time, when that house that you see and you recognise this is one that I want to go for, a lot of the time it will be desirable to other people too. And if you've had that track record and you've seen enough properties to know, to be able to know quickly, yes, this is good for me, and to act on it quickly. So you need that confidence, don't you? That degree of conviction to be able to go, yes, we're going to go for this and make an offer, as opposed to fluff around and then it disappears because you have a bit of experience, right? The other thing, of course, that comes with experience is, well, if you're out in the market looking as a buyer, I mean, as agents, we're dealing with all sorts of different kinds of properties in different locations, different budgets all the time. But as a buyer, you find a niche because you've got a certain amount of money and you prefer a certain half of town or that sort of thing, or roughly this size and this budget. And so you become an expert in that particular segment of the market, right? And so then by doing that and following up and seeing how much these properties sell for, you become a real expert in that particular segment. So then you're at the point where you can really understand how much to buy. You've really become an expert in valuing that segment of the market. Would you agree? I
agree. Absolutely.
Yeah. And now you're in a position to make good, strong offers promptly because you are an expert. So I always think that there's no shortcut to becoming the expert in that segment.
Yes, I suspect people don't realise how in tune they actually are with you know what I mean? That we see it and we see people actually becoming that expert, but they perhaps don't even really feel it themselves as to how in tune with the values that they are and how much they've learned about that segment of the market. But I 100% agree that's what happens.
That just comes from doing the work.
Yeah.
You just got to be out there,
got to be active,
doing the work, being active, collecting all this information, whether it be actually literally in some sort of spreadsheet or something, or just in your mind and in your head,
What do you think about due diligence? Like, what would your advice be to a first-time buyer once they hit the ground running on something that they like?
Yeah, and this is tricky. This can be a bit nerve-wracking because you've got lawyers, you've got building inspectors, you've got valuers, you've got council limbs. There's quite a lot of technical information
So you probably want to have those. That's probably something people want to know, is who they're going to use for those things early,
right?
Maybe,
someone
potentially
to have on your team, right? To have a lawyer. Building inspectors, I suppose if people are using building inspectors, they would, like anything, they would have their own preference. But a lot of the time now, when a property is on the market, it has a building inspection come with it, doesn't it?
It does, and I think, there's so much liability on builders that they are. We deal with this every day. They're thorough. They're very, very thorough, and I think a lot of stead can be put on an owner-supplied report because the liability on the building inspectors is so large, that they are
pretty careful,
very careful.
Yeah.
But equally, there's nothing wrong with getting your own independent opinion, and we would always advise that. So it doesn't mean that. What I think it does though is it should make buyers, even if they want to get their own independent one, and they don't have to. It would make them more comfortable doing that, because the risk of there being something that they are not, something there is lower when we already know what one reputable builder has said about it.
Yes, yeah.
And so therefore wasting, if you're going to spend $800 or $900 on a building report, it's less likely to be wasted if there's already one from the vendor that says.
Although you could argue if you're going to spend a bunch of money getting a report that says the same as the first one, you have wasted your money. But then you're doubly sure, aren't you?
Yeah, you're doubly sure, and again, it's independent. So I think that there's absolutely no problem or reason why someone wouldn't want to get an independent one. You don't have to, again, because I think there's a lot to be said for builders being incredibly thorough, but I also think it is important to recommend that people do.
Yes, of course. So you're rightly saying, I agree, that building inspectors are thorough and responsible, and they've got a lot of liability.
But they can make mistakes.
But that's right.
Yeah.
It's still, they're not perfect.
No.
And I mean, I've certainly seen 2 different building reports from different builders on the same property that say quite different things.
Yeah.
It doesn't
It's
mean
not intentional.
Doesn't mean that one builder is dodgy or anything like that.
And
right?
things can be interpreted differently too.
Yeah.
Which is just the nature of it. There are things.
But do you go out and do you go and get a building report done on every property you're going to make an offer on?
Well, that's a good question. Well, again, I mean, it's an impossible question to answer without. There's a lot of variables, right? Depends a lot on the situation. It's a situational decision,
Yeah.
And so, is one supplied by the vendor? How old is the property? How sophisticated is the buyer?
How clean and tidy is the property versus a lot of work needed?
Family members to look. What do you think about that? Do you think that getting a trusted friend or someone who's a builder to look at? Do you think that's enough?
On the building side of things? Oh, gosh. I mean, I've done that. But again, it depends on it depends on the person, depends on the buyer, depends on how much risk they can absorb.
They have, and that person has no liability, right?
No.
So that's an important thing for people to remember too. If they're getting a friend and you don't want to break, what happens if that person misses something? Is that going to spoil a relationship in the future? They're not being paid, they don't have any liability, so they're going to be there, giving sort of off-the-cuff advice, and anything could happen, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of questions here and not many answers, Craig.
No, it's the nature.
Can't we just have a simple 10-point checklist?
Well, as you know, life's not that simple, is it?
No, 100% it isn't, But so many first home buyers get fed up after having paid a lawyer 5 times to help prepare the offer.
And that's fair.
Having paid a lawyer 5 times to check the limb. Having paid a building inspector 5 times, and they make 5 offers and miss out. What do you do about that?
Well, there's no answer to that. I think it's the nature of the market, is that you have no guarantee of getting it, and sometimes perhaps in this down market you can negotiate more of these conditions as conditions.
They're less likely to be 5 other offers.
That's right, and even if they are, they may be more likely in this market to be conditional too. So the frenzied time of 2021, like everyone was just, because they were so sick of missing out.
If you didn't have a cash offer, there's not a hope.
Cash offers were just going in left, right, and centre, weren't they? And that has declined. I mean, you still get cash offers, but it's just that the odds are less. So if people are really worried about that, if they can't afford to do that time and time again, then put them in as conditions, and that's perfectly reasonable, even in competitive scenarios.
Yeah. So there is more ability to go ahead and do that in this slower market, as you say. But
so what else? You've got building, right? And you've got lawyers looking at contracts. What about LIM reports?
A LIM report, yeah. I mean, LIM reports are big.
What's a LIM report?
That's a land information memorandum. It's a council-produced document. And basically it's the council research everything that they can find on the property and in the immediate surrounding neighbourhood about the land, the services, the consents and the permits that
they don't
obtained.
research it though, right? They're just giving you what they have in all of their council files on those things.
Well, when I say research, I mean dig through their own records.
Yes, they pull all their records.
The council
and they give
records.
You their records.
That's
Correct,
right. Yeah. And I mean, one limb could be 60 pages, and another limb could be 360. They can be very long documents.
And
but
what sorts of things are people looking for in a limb?
I mean, I think a lot of the time people are looking. Well, it's information about the land, and this is becoming more prevalent now. Things like your floodplains. Your fault lines with earthquakes to see how close property is to that, your flight paths, ground shaking areas, that sort of stuff about the land, but also your services. So where are your sewerage, where's your stormwater, your water connections, these sorts of things. One of the most important things I think that people want to know is what I would generally term as the compliance issues, by which I mean has the work that's been done at the property all been consistent with regulations and council, local authority requirements. So in particular, since 1992 version of the Building Act, I think, was when they introduced the building consents process, with the Code of Compliance being the final stamp of confirming it's all been done in accordance with the Building Act and in accordance with what was approved by the building consent. So making sure that if there was a new bathroom put in, or even what might seem like a silly thing and a common sort of thing around the office, of course, as you know, is when someone has taken a regular shower and they've made it a tiled shower. That, for example, I understand, needs a building consent. And so it's just checking that all of these things that have been done and the way the property is now has actually been consented as appropriately, and the council have done all the requirement checks. It's become way more of an issue now, or recently, as the insurers have become more and more nervous about it. And if the insurers aren't willing to put full comprehensive insurance on the property, then the purchaser can't obtain the finances easily.
So, I mean, there are so many, if we actually think about it, there's so many variables here, from unit title properties, company share apartments, from the, lawyers looking at easements and caveats and things on the title. There's, this is a complex process. And there's and another reason why every time you make an offer, you learn a lot, because you go through this due diligence process. And this is normal for us. We're in it every single day. But for first-time buyers, this can be really daunting, right? And I don't think we're going to be able to cover today,
no, not a chance.
And even touch the surface of all the things that a buyer should look at. But these are certainly some of the things in terms of the building quality. But I would say, to summarise what we've talked about now, is get a good team, because great lawyer, good builder, a good finance person, good insurance broker. Having that sort of team and support of professionals is going to put you in good stead too.
Yeah, I mean. But you still got to make this trade-off between, every time you check a property out, do you want to pay $1,000, $1,500 for your lawyer to check the LIM? I mean, I don't. Okay, I'm not a first-time buyer anymore, but even when I was, I didn't. But I think you can learn a bunch of this stuff yourself. I mean, as you know, if you've read a few LIMs, 80% of the content of the LIM is the same, or very similar, right? So you can upskill yourself reasonably quickly in how to read a LIM. Same with the building report, this sort of thing. A lot of people also try and get advice from someone in their network who's not a builder or a lawyer or an insurance broker or a finance broker, that sort of thing. Just someone to give them general advice. And the default, I call them the Auntie Agnes, but it's the quality control officer, right? Whether it's mum and dad or an auntie or an uncle or someone in the family, all I would say is make sure it's someone who has real, genuine experience in real estate. Not someone who's bought 2 houses. Someone who's been around the traps a lot and has got a lot of it. Perhaps they're a property investor,
Yeah. I mean, and I agree with you that people can learn it through time, but I also think it's so important for first-time buyers, particularly, who are, not everyone is going to be as obsessed with, with getting to the bottom of it and not spending money on the lawyer as you.
What are you saying, Craig? It's my Scottish heritage.
And so I think for the average punter, right, for the average person out there who wants to buy a house, who's really, really excited, I think it's important that they take professional advice, but they can cover them if spending the money is a problem, they can cover themselves in conditions for those things. And
it's a trade-off, isn't it? It's a trade-off between how nervous you are or how thorough you are and how much money you want to spend. I mean, there's always a choice involved, isn't there?
Absolutely. Now let's get to making an offer and also the negotiating process. We can talk a little bit about tenders real quickly, but obviously one of the key things, not overpaying.
Not overpaying. I mean, we sort of touched on it before, that really there's no shortcuts here. You just have to understand values and in your segment of the market, right? I mean, how do you know what is overpaying and what is not?
But yes, absolutely. So going into a deal, you should figure out what you think it's worth and stick to it. Like there's a, because people can get caught up in these things if they work to an auction, or those are obviously very uncommon in Wellington. I think incredibly uncommon, and the best houses are usually tendered in Wellington. So tender, for example, you're going to go through a tender process. You could it's blind. You're worried about people. You can get caught up in it. What would your advice be to a first-time buyer in a tender?
Again, it depends on the nature of the situation, but some properties are very popular and other properties are not very popular. And so I suppose you've got to weigh up a few things. One of them, very important, is how badly do I want it? How well does it suit my requirements? And how upset would I be if I missed out on it? And I would often, if I'm talking to buyers, I would talk about be really honest with yourself, and you reach what I would call a walk away price. So you imagine you miss out. It sells for whatever, $750,000. Would you pay the $750 if you knew in arrears that you could buy it for $750? If the answer is yes, then consider making the offer of $750. What about $775? Yes, I would still pay $750. Consider what about $800? No, at $800 I would walk away. That's the walk away price.
Yep.
So perhaps $800 is the limit, or $790 is the limit. But you have to be really good at being so honest with yourself, because you haven't actually got the fear of loss right in front of you. And it's very different when you have. So be really honest with yourself about that. So that's what I would, in terms of your pricing. The other thing it depends on is this a tender and you've gone to the open home and the place is absolutely teeming with people and everyone loves the house? Well, then you're going to really have to go in boots and all.
But should you do that, going right back to the start of our original conversation, do you think that perhaps this sort of emotional buying, so to speak, and getting so into the whole nesting idea and falling in love with a property that can't love you back?
I think that's I think it's a really good conversation, or a really good topic. But I'm just assuming that someone has decided they want the house. You know what I mean? So
you're talking about from a real estate agent's perspective, not a buyer's perspective.
What I'm saying is, it's like you said, if someone is emotional about it, there's nothing wrong with that. As long as we're honest about the fact, I am emotional about it, I'm doing this for emotional reasons, and I'm fine with that. Whatever is driving it, at some point, you will not be willing to pay that price. You could consider going up to that price, but going beyond there, it doesn't make sense for you. Whether that sense is logically from a financial standpoint or just emotionally.
So one last thing before we wrap up, Adam, you mentioned earlier, you said, well, you can't time the market. And I agree with that in some senses, but I also think you can take the temperature. And I think,
And you think we should time the market now?
Well, what I would say is, just to wrap up, I mean, for first-time buyers right now, I mean, we're looking at 26% decline in prices.
Yep.
We're looking at prices that are now below long-term trend in Wellington.
Yes.
And buying a house is a long-term asset. It's not a short-term asset. People don't intend to sell in 1 or 2 years. So you can safely say that buying today, is a much better time to buy than was in 2021 and 2020. So with that in mind, you think you can take the temperature and say the time to buy is actually when no one else is. Mm-hmm. And we know that the amount of volume in the market, the amount of houses being sold, is significantly depressed in Wellington. Houses below long-term trend. What do you think? Good time to buy?
I mean, I think most people don't get to choose the time in the market when they buy.
It's a bit of luck, yeah.
It's
Good
just
point.
when it suits them.
Good point.
So the first priority, or the first criteria really is it now a sensible time for you in your life to buy a property? Yes, I agree with you. The temperature is great for buying a property now as it happens. What I would conclude is that if you have decided it's the right time to buy a property, you find a property that you like, you can afford it, you can purchase it. I wouldn't delay making that decision out of some hope that the buying conditions would get better.
I think that's fantastic. Let's leave it there.
Awesome. Good chat. Thanks for checking in. This has been The Lowdown. It's Adam and Craig here. We'll see you next time.